God, I thank you for this opportunity that we have to be here today, to look into your word. God, I am a sinner. I know I have done so many wrong things, and I have failed you so many times. We are all in that same boat. And we are thankful that you are a just God, but you're also a forgiving God. And that when we come to you and we ask you for forgiveness, that you give that to us. And Jesus died for us, and he died for all of our sins. He paid all it at one time for us. And especially today as we come and prepare for the Lord's Supper, God, I ask that you would just use your Holy Spirit to convict us all of those sins that we need to be bringing forward to you, that we can have a pure heart as we approach that table. Lord, I ask that this day would be a day that you would be glorified and honored by what is said today. In your name I pray. Amen. So we're into 1 Corinthians, and we're up to chapter 4. So why don't we go ahead and read the verses from today. It's 1 Corinthians chapter 4, and I'm going to be reading verses 1 through 5. A person should think of us in this way: as servants of Christ and managers of the mysteries of God. In this regard, it is required that managers be found faithful. It is of little importance to me that I should be judged by you or by any human court. In fact, I don't even judge myself, for I am not conscious of anything against myself. But I am not justified by this. It is the Lord who judges me. So don't judge anything prematurely. Before the Lord comes, who will both bring to light what is hidden in darkness and reveal the intentions of the hearts. And then praise will come to each one from God. So we look at the beginning of this passage. We're in just the very first section of 1 Corinthians chapter 4. It makes me think, okay, a person should think of us this way. What were they previously thinking? How do you think of people? What is the things that go on inside of your mind? What are the types of ideas that you have that Paul is now going to address? Because this is how you're supposed to do things. Well, what were we previously doing? If we go backwards to the previous chapter, in chapter 3 of 1 Corinthians, we see that they were saying, oh, I belong to Paul. No. I belong to Apollos. Oh, but I belong to Cephas. Well, okay. Well, what's the problem with that? The problem with that, as we learned also in 1 Corinthians 3, is that we belong to God. We belong to Jesus. And if we are not paying attention to that fact, we lose sight of things. We lose sight of what the important things are in our life. We lose sight of who do I belong to. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, 19 and 20 says, don't you know you were bought with a price? You don't just belong to him because he said, yeah, you can be on my team. No, he paid for you. Just died on the cross so that you could be his. He owns you. Now, I've heard people say different statistics, and I don't know what the true number is, but during this time that we're talking about, there was approximately 80% of the population were slaves, and only 20% were free. I have no idea how accurate that is, But when we think about the idea of that slavery was something that people understood. They understood what it was to be owned and to own someone else. When we think about this idea of that we belong to Christ, think about that as being owned, as a slave is owned. Not as a horrible, mistreated slave, but as a slave who is owned and who is cherished and loved and nurtured and developed and, all of what could be the best things of being that. Because what are we? We're not just the slave. We are also co-heirs with Christ. Remember at the end of chapter 3, it says, you have everything, and everything belongs to Jesus, and Jesus belongs to God. And we are co-heirs with Christ. And so when we are slaves to him, that slavery is not this horrible, wretched thing that mankind does. That slavery is the kind of thing that you long for. It is the thing that you would say, you have actually freed me from my horrible human existence in order to be in your perfectness. So We think about how these people were, where they were thinking about where they were coming from, what this idea was that was in their mind about how they were thinking about people. I belong to Paul. I belong to Apollos. I belong to Cephas. And really, we need to think about the idea that we belong to Jesus. And the biggest point where this comes in, to my mind, is we go back to the Old Testament. What is the first commandment? It's captured in Exodus chapter 20. Exodus chapter 20, verse 3 says, you shall have no other gods. No other gods. Well, if I belong to Jesus and he is who I look up to and this is who I get my instructions from and he tells me what to do and where to go and how to live, then he is my God. And so when I say I belong to Paul, then I put that kind of in-between layer there, and Paul becomes more important than he should be in my life. And so many times we think about these things that are more important in our life than they really should be. I mean, what is that TV show that you won't miss it? You know you're going to binge it as soon as it's out available. You just know you are. What is that radio program that you love to listen to? What is that music that you won't give up even though you know you probably shouldn't listen to it? What is that thing that you keep going back to that you know doesn't belong there in your life? And do we make that sometimes a God? And we say, I belong to this. I belong to my addiction, my problem, my sin, my issue. We make that into our thing. And we forget about the fact that we're not owned by that. We are owned by God. We belong to him. We are bought. We are paid for. And nobody can take you out of his hand. So when we think about this, as their previous mindset was that they belonged to somebody else. And now they're going to say, okay, well, now I can't think about belonging to Paul anymore. I have to think about the idea of belonging to God, just God, nobody else. Of course, my device isn't going to work. Come on now. There we go. So we go into 1a, and it says, a person should think of us in this way, as servants of Christ. So I started thinking about this idea of a servant, and what does that mean? And now I'm not the Greek guy who goes and does all the studies of everything, but occasionally I go and I use Bible Hub or Bible Gateway, and I can go dig in and you can see what the things are. So this word uparates, no idea how you really pronounce that, uparates. And it comes from these two words, upo and aratas, or whatever it is, which is a rower. And then you look at upo, and it's something that comes under the authority of. So we think back here, what's happening is that Paul has talked to these people, and he talked to them from agricultural terms. Because there's farmers everywhere. You got to eat. No farms, no food, right? So in Paul's day, there was farms everywhere, and so he could talk to them in agricultural terms. And they understood agricultural terms. And then he talked to them about building a foundation and laying a foundation and building on a foundation. And so he switched over from talking about agricultural terms to talking about building terms. And now he's switching terminology again. And he's talking about naval warfare. Naval warfare. Well, how is this naval warfare? What has this got to do with anything? What has uparates got to do with naval warfare? How is this a servant? Uparates is the under-rower. The under-rower would be a person on a specific ship. And that specific ship was called a trireme. The trireme looked like that, kind of, as best we can tell. And you'll notice that on the trireme, it had one very large sail, and it had 3 layers of oars. And the person that was at the top was exposed to the wind around them. So if you were on the ship next to them and you shot an arrow, you could hit the people on the top. They were exposed. But underneath them was a layer, and then underneath them was the bottom layer. And those people at the bottom, well, if you've ever been in the bottom of a stinky old ship from back then, this gets pretty nasty. So they were the under rowers. And there would be approximately 170 to 180 men, they think, on one of these ships. And the ships was built out of like pine and lighter woods. And so they could actually pick the thing up and carry it across land if they needed to. And they wouldn't leave it in the water. If they were going to go to shore, they had to take it out of the water because of what they built it in. They built it to be very light and very maneuverable, but it also had this big bronze thing in the front that would smash into other ships, and that was their warfare. And so you see in this picture here, I've kind of cut off the top where you can see those people, and then underneath that, there's 3 sets of oars. The bottom set of oars in that particular picture, you can see the oars have pulled into the ship. And so there's that bottom row of oars that they're just barely sticking out. You can just see the little white thing sticking out. And of course, this is a modern rebuild of what they expect that the trireme used to really actually look like. So you think about this idea of you're being an under-rower. An under-rower. You are making things happen. Nobody sees who you are. Nobody cares about you. You're just a guy doing a job down at the bottom of the boat. And who is it that we're thinking about? A person should think of us in this way. Paul is writing. Paul is saying, I am not important. You don't belong to me. You belong to Christ. I'm just the guy at the bottom of the boat doing my job to keep this thing going the way that God's telling me to go. I don't steer the boat. I don't make the decisions about the boat. I just make it go where God tells me to make it go. I am a servant. This idea of being a servant is captured in several areas. Matthew chapter 19, verse 30 says, "But many who are first will be last, and the last will be first." Matthew 23, 11 and 12 says, "The greatest among you will be your servant. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted." In Luke, we have this passage where there's an argument that breaks out, right? And the disciples want to know, who's going to be the greatest? Who is going to be the greatest in your kingdom? And Jesus says, you got it all wrong. You guys got it all wrong. Flip it over. You want to be the best when we get to heaven? You be at the bottom now and you serve. And Paul's saying, I want to be at the top when I get to heaven. So right now, I'm going to be at the bottom of that boat, putting my effort into everything, breaking my back, toiling and sweating. The people above me that are sick, they're puking. The puke is coming down, it's landing on my head. I just keep doing my job. The water comes over the thing and it gets me all soaking wet and I'm freezing cold. I just keep doing my job. It's miserable down there and it's dark and it's dank and it's nasty. I just keep doing my job. I just keep doing my job. Paul's got a purpose for why he's doing his job. And his job is to be the servant. In John chapter 13, we have the famous passage where Jesus washes the disciples' feet. And then he says to them, do you understand why I did this to you? Do you understand what I have done? I have given you this example that I, who is the highest, has come the lowest, so that I will wash your feet, the detestable thing, to be a servant to you, to show you the example of how it is that you are supposed to live. So now I ask you, are you a servant? Are you a servant? Do you consider yourself to be an under-rower? Are you somebody who goes into the bogs and the weeds and the nasty and you just do what needs to get done? Because you're only really concerned about is what God has told you, this is your job. And so you just go do your job. This is what God has called you to do. To be a servant means that you don't worry about all this other stuff. And you just begin to say, I'm only going to be concerned with going in the direction that God tells me. I will row to the beat that God provides. I will stop when he says stop. I will go when he says go. Do you want to be first or do you want to be last when we get to heaven? So we go back to 1 Corinthians 4:1. It says, a person should think of us in this way, as servants of Christ and managers of mysteries of God. So the second thing here that we see in the way that we're supposed to think about it, people who are in authority, who are in positions of leadership, is that number one, that they're servants, and now they're managers. Now, I'm not a manager where I work. I certainly have management responsibilities for several layers of things that have to get done. And many of you, even if you work at McDonald's or Burger King, Wendy's, Chick-fil-A, you manage some small thing that you have to do. The guy at the Dunkin' Donuts thing who's taking your order has to manage putting this stuff in with people talking and making noise behind him and figure out what to do and how much you owe versus the next one, keep them in order. And there's a system to do all that stuff, and he manages that. And then you have people who, they're the CEO of a major corporation, and the management level is right there. And somewhere along the line, you fit in, and you have to be a manager. Well, what else do we know about being a manager? A manager is also a steward. A steward means what? It means you're responsible for something. Well, if you're responsible for something, who owns that? Not you, because you're the steward of it. You're not the owner of it. And when you are the steward of something, you are responsible to make sure to the owner of what happens with that. So the CEO might be the guy who's running the whole ship, but he still owes an explanation to the board of directors as to what's happening with that company. He's not his company. He has to give an explanation to somebody. And the question that I ask for you then is, how are you doing with your explanation? Are you prepared to give your report? Every year we do a yearly report, right? And we do the summaries. And we say, okay, in this committee or in this ministry, we did these things. And then we publish that book of reports at the end of the year or at the beginning of the year, depending on your perspective. How are you doing in your ministry, in your calling, where God has called you specifically to say, I want you to do this? This is how you're going to serve, right? Because we know that the body is built up of believers and that all of the believers have been given gifts, talents, and abilities. And those gifts, talents, and abilities are specifically intended to encourage, to build up, to edify the entire body. And because you're supposed to be a servant, you're supposed to just do the job, get it done. But not only that, God gave you those as responsibilities. He gave you those as abilities. He gave you those talents. And he's going to ask you, how are you doing with what I gave you? How are you doing? Mark 12 says, he began to speak to them in parables. A man planted a vineyard, put a fence around it, and dug out a pit for the winepress, and built a watchtower. Then he leased it to tenant farmers and went away. At harvest time, he sent servants to the farmers to collect some of the fruit of the vineyard from them. You got to give it back. It's not yours. You got to give it back to God. The farmer planted this. He got it all set. He got it all ready to go. And then he said, okay, you people, you're going to run this for me. And they agreed to it. And then, of course, if you read through the rest of that story, they decided that they were going to rebel. They chose not to do what they were supposed to do. They chose, well, we'll kill him. We'll get rid of him. And then they send his son. Oh, we'll just kill him. Then we can have the stuff. We can own the whole vineyard. It can be ours. We'll just take it over. And of course, what happens for them? Punishment. Punishment is what happens for them. God's given you abilities and talents and gifts. And when he asks you, how are you doing on that? Are you looking forward to a punishment? I remember when I was a kid, and the punishment was going to be, I was going to get spanked. I just knew that there were certain things that you just do, you're going to get spanked. I knew I was going to get a spank. I knew that when Dad came home, we were going to go into the room, he was going to sit me down, and he was going to say to me, what did you do wrong? And I would have to admit what I did wrong. Horrible. What a horrible, horrible thing. And then I would have to apologize for what I did wrong. And now I already knew I was going to get spanked, but he would tell me, oh, this is going to be 3 spanks, 4 spanks, 1 spank. Oh, yes. Now, I know that this spank is coming. I've been knowing that this spank is coming. But first thing he had me do was talk to him about, what did you do wrong? Why are we in here? Why are we having this conversation? Do you know what you did? Do you actually understand why this is a wrong thing to do? Do you know how much I love you and how much I actually don't want to do this right now? Yeah, how do you think I feel? How about the guy that we're going to get whacked? You think I'm looking forward to this? No. I'm not looking forward to this. This punishment stuff is not something I'm interested in any way, shape, or form. And yet I can guarantee you that how many times that my father disciplined me out of love, and I made the choice, I will not do that again. I will not do that again. When the psalm says, his rod and his staff, they comfort me, you know what he's talking about? He's talking about the guy, the shepherd is going up to that lamb and going, whack, knock it off. You're going to get yourself killed by the wolf. And then the lamb goes like, okay, I'll do what you said. Well, there's a time when we all get to that situation where we've done something wrong. The punishment's coming. You know it's coming. You can't get out of it. You're stuck. The cops already pulled you over. Good luck. You've already been caught. It's not like you haven't been caught and you think, oh, maybe I'll get away with it. No, you've already been pulled over. That's it. It's time to pay the price. You know, the high school teacher said, hey, you don't got the time? Don't do the crime. When it comes time to meet God and he says to you, how did you do? Do you really want to have to come up with, well, you know, his fault, her fault, he did, and then I didn't like this, and it wasn't comfortable, and just can you show mercy? That's not what I want to do when I get to heaven. I want to be able to say, yeah, I blew it, but I sure am glad Jesus paid the price for that. Sure am glad that Jesus paid the price for that because I don't have to go to hell. I still get to go to heaven because Jesus paid the price and he's my Savior, and so I get to go to heaven because Jesus paid that price. You know, there was no getting out of the spanking with Dad. But when it comes time and I get before God and he says, you blew it, at least I can say, Jesus already paid the price for my mistakes. I don't want to have to go to him with more mistakes. I don't want to have to go to him with bigger mistakes. I want to learn my lesson and like when I was a kid, receive the discipline so that I can say, I'm never going to do that again. Because that's being a manager of what God has given me. So I have to be a steward and I have to be a manager. In Matthew chapter 25, it says, for it is just like a man about to go on a journey. He called his own servants and entrusted his possessions to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2 talents, and to another 1 talent, depending on each one's ability. And he goes away. I'm not going to read the whole thing. He goes away, he comes back a long time later. What happens? Guy with 5 talents comes back and he says, hey, I got 5 more. That's 10. Here you go. Master says, yeah, buddy. Loving it. Guy with 2 talents. Master comes back. He says, I got 2 more. I did good. Master again. Yes. Both times he says, come and join me in my joy. Be part of the good celebration. But there's one guy that only had 1 talent. And he buried it. I hope I never have to say to God, I just buried it. You gave me this gift. I could have helped people with that gift. I could have shown them who you are with that gift. But I just buried it. I just blew it so bad. The master takes that 1 talent away and he gives it to the guy who's got now 10. And he says, this is what's going to happen. Jesus tells us this is the kind of thing that's going to happen. There are going to be those of you who are going to get to heaven, and you're going to have been given a lot of talents and a lot of gifts and a lot of abilities, and God is going to say, how'd you do with that? And you're going to say, I did awesome. Check it out. And he's going to go, yeah! And then there's going to be the other people at the other end of the extreme, and he's going to say, I love you. Sad. I still love you. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be that guy. Are you being a good steward of the money, gifts, talents, time, abilities, possessions, your whole world, everything that you have, everything that's part of you? Are you being a good steward of those things? Or are you just burying them? 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 2. Hey, we made it to verse 2. Check it out. We've only got 3 more to go after this one. In this regard, it is required that managers be found faithful. I very specifically left faithful out of my discussion about managers because it says so in verse 2. And what is another synonyms for faithful? Trustworthy and reliable. Trustworthy and reliable. Are you trustworthy? Are you reliable? Are you faithful? When we think about the idea of a husband and wife, are they faithful to each other? We think about, that comes to the marriage bed, and are they being treating each other correctly, maritally, and are they not going out and having dalliances that they're not supposed to? But faithful, when I think about God, means, am I not supposed to be his bride, his perfect virgin bride? Is it not the same that I should not be dallying with other things? Shouldn't be dallying with other gods? I shouldn't be going, like Proverbs talks about, don't go down to the woman who's out there calling from her house. What is that? It's all about going to the side, and it's adultery. It's going into some other relationship that you don't belong in. Whenever I put God not in first place, I've put something else into first place. And whatever that thing is has now become God for me, and I'm dallying in the wrong relationship. If you are not putting God in first place, you are dallying in the wrong relationship, which basically equates to adultery against God. And yes, I know I'm extrapolating a few things there, but put the pieces together. Is that where you really want to go with your life? There is a time for you to make a determination. I will be obedient to my God. I will trust him because he is trustworthy. And I will be trustworthy for him so that he can know that he can trust me. You're going to love this. I'm moving already to verse 3. 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 3 and 5. 3 through 5. It is of little importance to me that I should be judged by you or by any human court. In fact, I don't even judge myself. Why? I want to know why. How is it that Paul can say, I don't even judge myself? Doesn't this seem like some guy who just took his nose and stuck it way up in the air and said, I don't even judge myself? How does he say this? I love the fact that he gives me the answer in the next verse. Right there in the next verse. It says, for I am not conscious of anything against myself. Meaning, I don't know anything that I've done wrong. I'm not aware of anything that I've done wrong. Right? But I am not justified by this. Meaning, just because I don't know that I've done something wrong doesn't mean that I have actually not done anything wrong. It's God who's going to be the judge. It is the Lord who judges me. It doesn't matter what you think. It's the Lord's opinion that matters. You will hear Tom and I repeatedly say this. It doesn't matter what Brian's opinion is. It doesn't matter what Tom's opinion is. It doesn't matter what Rex and the deacons' opinions are. It doesn't matter what the trustees' opinions are, or this group, or that group. It matters what God thinks. If we could all just get ourselves into that mindset of it doesn't matter what your opinion on the matter is. You know what? I like blue better than green. So what? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Oh, but I like vanilla better than chocolate. Oh, but it doesn't matter because it doesn't matter what my opinion is. It only matters what God's opinion is. It is the Lord that judges, and he judges each of us individually. So I don't have to go around judging myself and beating myself up and beating myself up. Yeah, I'm going to make mistakes. And yeah, I know I'm going to make mistakes. And the whole reason why Jesus died on the cross was to pay for all of those mistakes. So once I've made my mistake, I do the repentance thing where I say to God, I am sorry. And I make the determination, I will never do that again, so that I can be a good steward of what he has given me, and I can serve him the way that he has called me to serve him. It all ties in together. There is the servant who just does what he's told to do. There is the steward who takes responsibility for decisions and actions that he knows he's supposed to take care of. So when we judge, are we really taking the position of what God's position should be? Or are we stepping over the line somehow? Even if I'm judging myself, am I stepping beyond what God has called me to do? Did he make me a judge? He did not. At least not that I'm aware of. I certainly have no ability to judge any of you, nor do I have the ability to judge myself, because only God is the judge. Again, regardless of our opinions, it still is going to come down to the fact that God will make the determination for whether or not you were a good servant, whether or not you were a good steward, whether or not you actually did what he wanted you to do. And he knows your heart, and he is a forgiving and merciful God, but he also has a purpose and a reason for the things that he has for you to do. Ephesians chapter 2 says he created these works for you to do after you became a Christian. After you became a Christian, he created works for you to do that you can glorify him through. He gave you gifts, talents, and abilities so that you can glorify him, that you can build up the body of believers. And he will expect an accounting of those because they don't belong to you. They belong to him. And that's what stewarding is about. Verse 5, so don't judge anything prematurely before the Lord comes, who will both bring to light what is hidden in darkness and reveal the intentions of the heart. And then praise will come to each one from God. Let us show love to one another. Tolerance, forbearance, grace. How about a little bit of grace? Look, I walked by you this morning and I didn't say hi. I didn't mean to. I'm sorry. It wasn't my intention to ignore you and offend you and upset you. I just was walking down the hallway lost in thought. And so if you said hi to me and I didn't say hi back to you, I promise I wasn't purposely deciding like, hey, I'm going to pick on Lulu today, and I'm not going to say hello to her. That's not what I do. Let's not judge. Let's give a little bit of grace. Let's show a little bit of compassion. Let's show a little bit of forbearance. Can we be the people who show love to each other to say, I'm not perfect. I don't expect you to be either. We're all just sinners, saved by grace, doing the best that we can to be good servants and to be good stewards. If you are a good servant and you are a good steward, you are a leader, and you lead people, and you demonstrate that to people around you. If you are not a good steward and you are not a good servant, you are a leader showing people the wrong way to go. Because as a Christian, he says you are the light of the world and you are the salt of the earth. And that means that people around you are looking to see what you're doing. So is your servanthood and is your stewardship that which is going to bring people closer to God or drive them further away? It is our responsibility to be faithful to these things. Above all else, it is our responsibility. I'm going to transition. We've got a couple transitions coming up here. I'm going to transition to talk about something that's been on our hearts Tom and I have been meeting with some different groups, and part of that is meeting with the budget and finance group. And so as part of meeting with the budget and finance group, and it's in your bulletin. If you have a bulletin, grab your bulletin and take a look at that. Grab a bulletin. I don't have a bulletin with me, but if you have a bulletin, take a look at that bulletin right now. You got your paper bulletin. Look in the middle. There's a financial thing. Dave's going to put that up on screen. There's a thing from January, which you're not going to have currently in your bulletin now, but we're going to get to February in a second. This is what it showed in your bulletin in January. I copied and pasted it. Now, if you guys have an electronic email of some sort that Helen sends out emails to you through the church, you get this as part of the bulletin, and you get it every single week. It's called the Sunday Links, or Sunday Morning Links, or something like that. And she sends out all these links for you guys to do. And one of those is the bulletin. And so inside the bulletin in January, it said this. We have that $31,951.79. That'll be the same thing for all 12 months, because you take the full year's budget and you divide it by 12. So that number is never going to change. And that's a budgeted number. It's not a real number. It's a budgeted number. The next number down is what actually came in during January. This is real numbers now. This is real numbers. And so then the next one down is you have real expenses. So what came into the money, what came into the church for money, and what went out of the church for money. There's no funny money happening here. The reality is we're $11,000 short in January. And that's our information for the bank. So let's go to February. So here we are in February. So this is for February. Top line's the same. $22,000, $29,000. We're $7,500 short for February. Now, I just started a new job. When I started a new job, I went on an interview. As part of my interview, I said to the boss, "How long have you been here?" And he said, "Oh, I've been here for, 12 years, 20 years. I don't know. I forget what he said." "Well, what keeps you here?" "Oh, what keeps me here is the. Great. You want us to go hire a pastor, and the pastor's going to come in, and he's going to go on an interview, and he's going to say, 'Tell me about what's going on with the church.' Well, let's see. We've been in the hole, and in the hole, and in the hole." And he's going to say, "Well, there's no job security. No thanks." Now, I'm being as very blunt and as rude as I can be. The people of the church are asking us to go forward and to get things started with a pastor search committee. And I'm telling you right now, I don't know any pastors that are going to come in when we have a continuous negative budget, negative money is coming in. It's just simple. Now, I want to take a moment here and say that there are people in this congregation who are giving above and beyond. And then there are people who are not giving at all. Now, I'm not talking about tithe here. I'm talking about God has called you to give in a certain thing. And I'm not even talking about tithing right now. I'm just talking about giving right now. If you are giving to the church, that gets recorded, and then we can do different reports on that kind of stuff, right? And so one of the things that we can do is we can do a report which just basically breaks it down into chunks of numbers, right? And so that's what we've done. We've done a thing that just breaks it down into chunks of numbers. And so the next things that we're going to show you is just some chunks of numbers so you can have an idea of what's happening here. You can actually see what has come into the church from different families. If there's no families there, I took out all the ones that that had a zero. Notice that there's no names here, there's no identifying information, and we did chunks of $100. So for that first one, it's just zero. But the second one there, it's 0 to 100. Well, it could be $1, it could be $99. I don't know. I don't want to know. It's none of my business. But this is the numbers here, people. This is what people have given. And so at this end of things, you say, well, you know what? I'm not judging anyone. I very specifically took the time to tell you that I am not here to judge you and that I have no authority to judge you, and I cannot judge you because God tells me I can't. So I am not passing judgment here for anybody, no matter where you are on this list. I'm saying to you, be aware of what is really, truly financially happening here in this church. So here's this first set of numbers that goes up to between $300 to $400. This is total money coming in from January and February. So I don't know if they gave it all in January, if they gave it all in February, half and half, no clue, don't know, don't want to know. You go to the next one, Dave. Here we have the next set of chunks, 4 to 5, and so on. Notice that I highlighted or grayed the non-member families. So there's one at the top there, and there's one down near the bottom. Again, I don't have any clue who these people are. I don't want to know. It's none of my business. It's none of your business. But this is just to show you how many people are giving to the church, and in what form are they giving to the church. This is what happens. This next set of numbers, again, you see that the non-member at the top there has been put in gray to kind of make it differentiate a little bit. There's a significant jump there at the bottom. There's a line there. You notice that the one, not the very bottom one, but the one above it says 1,700, goes up to 1,700. And then there's nothing to 18 and 19 and 2,000. The next one up was the 2,100. So I'm not going to show you a bunch of zeros. But just that line there is to indicate that there's a jump between one and the next. All right, Dave, go ahead. Here's the top. I don't know who these people are. I don't want to know who these people are. God bless you that you are able to do that much, and that's amazing. And when I say to you that there are people who are giving above and beyond, there are people who are giving above and beyond. Amen. Hallelujah. God bless these people. I am thrilled that there are people who can do this. This is not the expectation. Jesus said about the widow who gave her 2 mites that she had given out of her poverty, she had given all she had. This isn't about you giving out of your poverty to give everything you have. That is not what this is about. That woman had the gift of giving. These people have to have the gift of giving. This has to be their gift. This is not the expectation. Again, this is to let you know where the church stands financially. We are going through the steps that we need to do to get to pastor search. We are looking at what the finances are in this church. And we are 2 months of seriously being in the hole financially. So I'm going to ask you to think about what God's calling on your life is as far as being a servant and as far as being a steward of the things that God has told you to do and the things that God has given you the abilities to have. Are you doing what God is calling you to do when it comes to your finances? It's a yes or no question. If you are doing what God has called you to do, awesome, fantastic. If you are not doing what God has called you to do, there will be a time when He says, I gave you this and I asked you to do this with it. Why didn't you? Do you want to be the guy who started off with 5 and ended up with 10? Or you want to be the guy that started with 1 and ended up with none? You notice that he got the same praise for the guy who had 5 and got 5 more, and the guy who started with 2 and got 2 more. Look, if you make $100,000 a year or $1 million a year or $1 billion a year, you're not going to be able to give the same amount of money. That's just life. It is what it is. But if you don't do what God has called you to do, that's between you and God. I will never know, and I don't want to know. So we're going to break away from this and transition into a slightly awkward transition. We're going to break away from this and go into our time of communion. As part of that, I want to say to you, today is a day of evaluation. When you are thinking about the communion, we need to think about the idea that we have all recognized we sinned. And so when we do this, we need to make sure that our relationship with God is correct. We need to make sure that we as individuals before God can say, my heart is clean. Being able to participate in this is not about membership. It's not about who you know, where you come from. This is entirely about having a right relationship with God, that you're a Christian, you have Jesus in your heart, and that you know for sure that you are able to do this because you have God in you. And that is correct, and that relationship is correct.